policies, not only the language, but as the situation has moved through, some of the wording has changed, some of the facts have become clearer, or that was, okay, what is, and I think you guys need more managers. I'm referring now to a report. Sorry, Michael, you're on the, Michael.
Michael? I'm sorry.
I'm reading your report, so I thought you might want to.
I apologize.
March 24th, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a science, I teach little kids, think tutors. At some point in the discussion, in the last 5 months, manager was told and couldn't be at this act, something else was being delivered, or something else was going on over there, and he couldn't be in 2 places. Again, my point for number whatever, I think we need more engineers.
Shift operations, again, just to clarify.
Okay.
Engineers are not shift operations managers. It's a totally separate, there are more things of that nature. You have engineers, but the shift operations manager more than likely is not an engineer. Okay, so I know it's a terminology in that nature. So generally, slides you're referring to is there's an entire engineering organization, and they have seen quite a bit of attrition over the years due to retirements and or going to Vogue or VC Summers or getting other jobs moving out of the area. So that is definitely, it's a related issue, but it is separate. And I can report back that SRNS has put in corrective actions to hire, retain, and recruit additional engineers. They requested some additional with regard to compensation packages. So the department granted that to them within the last month or so. And so they are taking that issue very aggressively and moving forward to implement corrective actions.
And again, I say that as time has moved forward, the good thing about SRNS is that they've taken action to move forward. What I would like the CAB to decide today is whether to move forward with this. I think we should move forward with this. And what's going to happen is that DOE is going to come back and say, on such and such, we did such and such, and we've hired such and such, and we'll take care of that. And there's no problem with that. But I do want it to show that we saw the issue, we addressed the issue, we see it as an issue.
I like that, Jenny. I
Okay,
think that's
that's
good.
where I'm coming from.
Can we maybe look at adding number 4, something about a human resource piece? You know, maybe reminding the employees that they have whistleblower protection, or you know, if they're in a group of people and they see this happening. Because you know, I haven't read it. I don't think the report's been released yet, but it just seems like a human people deciding that they were going to do this. And I don't think there's any policy in the world that can stop 4 people from deciding, I'm kind of lazy-ish and I want to do this and it's whatever. But if people feel like they have a chain of command, like, you know what, I'm not going to step out in front of 3 people and tell them that they're doing something wrong, but I know, here's my supervisor's cell phone, and this is what I can do. We're going to help.
You make an excellent point. So with regard to rotating those people, you're exactly right. You get that level of comfort. If you have to carpool home with David, you don't want to have to call him out 10 minutes before you have an hour car ride and say, David, why are you doing this? So there is that level of familiarity and camaraderie. And so one of the facility manager's responsibility is to create a work team that has constructive conflict, okay? And it's constructive. You challenge each other. You hold your brother's keeper. You say, David, are you doing what you should be doing over here? And David asks Larry, you're doing a great job. So you want that interaction, and you make a very good point. And so one of the responsibilities of the facility manager is to evaluate the performance of everybody who reports up through him or her and make those decisions. And so if you want to put that in your recommendation, I think it's spot on. I think you're exactly right. You need to have that. Again, I call it constructive conflict, because it needs to be positive. You don't want people belittling other people, but you want it constructive, and you need to have that interaction. And this was not there. It's very clear. Nobody stopped each other. The other thing I just want to make one of the things, the facility manager to review all procedures. Again, my perspective, the facility, that would degrade the level and the focus of the facility manager if he or she had to review every procedure. You have a management team there. And it's up to the facility manager. Right now, it's designated.
We're taking that out.
Yeah, Don jumped right on that. Yeah, let's make this a little more general.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I wanted to clarify shifts, okay, so people aren't going to go away from, and just keep in mind, have people that are all procedures, writing, and that's where DOE as well as SRNS, putting more requirements and procedures. Yeah, it may feel good, it may sound good, but you hold people accountable of what you expect them to do. And putting 3 or 4 or 5 separate checks and balances in place, there's good for checks and balances, but you keep layering another set of review, another set of review, and some people will say, well, Dawn's going to look at this, I'll go ahead and sign this responsibility. So we want to make sure we have that checks and balances, but you don't overdo it by putting in more and more checks and balances. Hold people accountable, and as we talked about, their reaction reinforces that accountability factor, I believe, and I think that's where SRMS believes, that it reinforces, here's the expectation, held accountable to that, and there's no gray area. It's, you follow procedures, you're going. So I just wanted to share some of those other aspects. Feel free to write any recommendation you want, and we'll take it under advisement.
Mike Nicholas, DOE. I just wanted to also mention, you brought up the staffing. I believe there's a staffing presentation tomorrow at the Strategic and Legacy Management Committee, so that subject could come up again tomorrow.
I think I want to get just a feeling of, does the committee want to move forward with this?
With a few
Based on the
edits,
comments that you have received so far, just revise the recommendation, and I would recommend that we move forward with it.
Okay. And
Yeah,
can I
agree.
get a volunteer to be a recommendation manager with me?
Jenny.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
She's a lawyer.
We're sorry for you.
Oh, that's right.
If I keep talking, that's one of me. So at this point, we have manager funds, we'll redo it. Let me just, I'm sorry. So, I think we're gonna rewrite the background, because some things have changed in that recommendation. We're gonna rewrite that. What I have notes on is, Dawn's going to do number 4. I've also added number 5, that our review team members from Nana to see if this is the best method. We can work on that one. I didn't know how to do the rest. You might want to.
I can scribble something here.
Okay.
Email it to you.
I put something else on the.
Okay. I think we'll flip-flop back to Jay Ray and let him give his presentation after that. Jay?
Okay, first I just looked for an article that talks about the employees and what happened to them. I was told that they determined not to find that in an article. I looked at an article in Augusta, 2 articles of that. One came out in the Chronicle, one came out in the Aiken paper right after the event. I couldn't find any others, but I do believe that was in an article someone who talked about that. So anyway, just wanted to talk about that. Yeah, if you don't mind, clear that up. All right, I'm Jay Ray. I worked at the site for 24 years, and I told Pat, I said, as long as I continue to enjoy it, I'll continue working. And most of those days I have enjoyed working here. And, I think Dawn did too, right? Except when she got to work with me. No. All right. I brought some props, and I'm not sure if we'll get to everything. Usually, by this time, there's an introductory, I'm going to have to leave that there because that might follow. You guys have had an orientation session. Here, that might crowd me out there. You've heard of the book, Engineering for Dummies and so forth. This is a fuel element for dummies. All right, there's a laser on here. All right, so, anyway, not about me. Now, is there anyone here that has not been through the facilities? You don't count.
All of them? No.
Maybe people have been through H Canyon? Okay, maybe seen K area from the outside and L area? Straight through there. Okay, like I said, typically at this point, there's been an orientation class for the new CAD members. And what I did is I added some extra pictures to the presentation this year. Last year I went through the same presentation. Did add one slide, but I've added some extra pictures and some more if you haven't seen the facilities before. All right, so there's a standing nuclear materials committee item regarding nuclear materials system plan, I think is what the words might be on that. For review reasons, when this went out for review, they wanted to say nuclear materials management program. So this is basically what you might call a discussion about our system plan. And some of the pictures I threw in this time, for those of you familiar with the site and work that's been done there in the past, you know that we make plutonium-238 that gives off heat and is used by deep space probes and satellites as an energy source. So this one picture here is actually Saturn, taken from the Cassini spacecraft. That's not an artist's rendition. And that was made possible by the site and the people at the site. And we'll talk a little more about the facilities as we get into it. This over on the right-hand side is a trailer used to transport low-enriched uranium from the Savannah River site to a TVA vendor for making commercial fuel. And we have provided, from the years 2003 through 2011, a little over tons of low-enriched uranium, which, if it was used to power the United States, it actually powered the United States for 47 days. If it was just used in South Carolina, I think it was about 11 years. Now, it went to Tennessee Valley Authority and powers their reactors there. Anyway, that's some of the things that we've done outside and continue to do. And we'll be starting this process back up probably beginning into next year or beginning of 2018. This is a slide that was developed by the CAB years ago. Maxine has worked on a couple of updated slides that I think you were looking for on the flow of materials through the site, through nuclear materials facilities. Didn't make it into this presentation, but I believe I'll be presenting this at the full CAB next month, and we'll probably have those slides for you there. Acronyms, Most of you are probably familiar with those. Nothing new has been added to the list. This presentation, I believe I've cut out most of the acronyms and spelled most things out for space permits. And if there is something you see that you don't understand what it means, I think we might have a few minutes so we can take the time for interruptions if you want to ask right now. All right. All right, so what we're going to go through today, what would be the system plan or the management program is we're going to talk about the assumptions and the improvements that we have in facilities that are operating now in nuclear materials. A couple of pictures here. This is actually a sampler that was installed as part of a test project for one of the labs on the West Coast. I think it might have been Pacific Northwest Lab. We offered the Canyon as a test bed for some technologies that people wanted to test. And this is a version of a sampler that's actually installed and operating in the Canyon right now. The one that's installed is called Short Path Ultraviolet Visible Light. So this is looking at plutonium solutions, and it's actually looking in the ultraviolet or visible light spectrum. This is a long path, and what this would do would allow us to look at more dilute samples. The short path is actually quite useful when we were starting up HD line and processing material up there. Don't recall if you remember there was a robot inspection that was done in the ventilation, the main ventilation tunnel, back a few years ago. This is actually a 3-foot section of concrete, 1 foot thick, that we core drilled out. Kind of looks like a birthday cake. And the Canyon is about 60-something years old, so it might be appropriate for that. There are some little studs that stick up here that may look like birthday candles. But anyway. Oh, and by the way, this is Pat Squire's birthday shot. Oh. That secretary cooks makes very good cake. This is a cask over on the left-hand side. It's a VRR cask. And I'm sure Maxine could tell you some more, but it's a cask used for various fuels, including Triga fuels, which some of the universities use. And I think it's being deconned, if I'm not.
Yeah, it's getting put into the transfer bag.
Transfer bag.
That one actually goes into the water, it gets unloaded. It's for our domestic research reactors.
It's true. Whatever that thing is. All right. That was supposed to prompt Maxine to say what it was, Triga fuels. Go ahead if you want to.
No, I'll get it wrong. We don't have a trigger here.
Yeah, we don't have triggers.
So this first group of facilities up here, H Canyon, HB Line, K area, L area, are all under nuclear materials purview. Those facilities belong to Pat McGuire, and I work for Pat. Work for Tony Folger, works for Pat. Maxine does also. The F area, H area analytical labs in that next group are an important part, as well as S3L, and I'll get into the role of some of these. Of course, liquid waste, we couldn't do anything without liquid waste facilities and our solid waste facilities in E area. Also have some deactivated or inactive facilities, 235F. I think you've had presentations on what we're doing there, and I'll actually talk about that just a little bit later on. And then also F Canyon, FB line has been deactivated, but that's a sister facility to the H Canyon. Receiving basin for off-site fuels, basically what it says, that's where we used to receive fuels from off-site. And now all that's been consolidated in the L area. And then C area, which is a former reactor along the K area, L area, has heavy water stored there. We'll talk mainly about these first facilities and what we're doing there and kind of a timeline, a little bit about the middle section and a little less about the bottom section, except for 235F. A couple of pictures I added, or one picture I added, I did have the one in 235F after last year. That is the former 235F facility. There were several facilities in there, including PUF, that you may This is just a bit of historic stuff here. The neutrino, which is a very small particle, essentially has no mass, has no charge, does not interact with the matter very much, unless you watch the 2012 movie, I think called 2012, when it really messed up the Earth. But the neutrinos are rather very small particles, and they don't interact. On average, there's about 300 of these things in a cubic centimeter. So the world is full of them, the universe is full of them, but they were very small, and back in 1976, they actually used a B reactor to confirm the presence of that particle. I thought that was just kind of a neat thing there. Okay, so here are the main facilities still in operation. Some have been repurposed, but still in operation and under Pat's purview. We've got K-Area, which was a reactor facility, and is now used primarily for storage of uranium, or primarily for plutonium, and we also have some uranium stored there. L-Area safely receives and stores spent nuclear fuel, awaiting disposition, and then H-Area is really the disposition facility for spent fuel and also for plutonium and or uranium stored in K. Alrighty, so general assumptions for our operations is that we're always going to support the safe and secure operation of our facilities to disposition uranium, plutonium, and also store those materials awaiting disposition. We're also going to meet any DOE, environmental management, and NNSA non-proliferation missions, which we do support. And we also support efficient operations, and as part of that, we do minimize waste generation. Picture that I added here is spent fuel being charged to the dissolver. The date on that is August 13th, 2012. If you remember discussions about the sodium reactor experiment fuel that we processed, which was a fuel that was potentially vulnerable to long-term storage. We began planning for that when Don was there and actually processed it in about a year and a half. And that was actually the first chick of fuel they inserted into the dissolver. This is a shot inside of K-Area. These are what we call 9975 drums. They're model 9977. So every type of storage container gets a number. And these just happen to get 9975. They can be used for storage and or transportation across the U.S. and have been used for transportation. So kind of getting into the meat of it, so H-Canyon. I mentioned that we had dissolved sodium reactor experiment fuel. We started that in 2013, finished up in 2014. At least a third of those solutions have been sent to the BWPF facility for vitrification, and that is ongoing and will be ongoing for several years. The BWPF process can only take so much of that at a time. So we'll be doing that, I think, for the next 5 or 6 years. But the fuel has been dissolved. The amount of uranium in there was very low, so we did not recover that and process it for sending to TVA. We are in the process of starting up the parts of the canyon that have been idle since about 2011. If you jump down to the first sub-bullet, we have started up dissolving, and we did that back with sodium reactor fuel. Since then, we've also dissolved a good area that we will begin extracting in 2011. We've got head-end operational, which is just is a process at the beginning of the canyon used for purifying the streams and removing some of the bulk trash, you might say, that might be in the fuel. And then the second cycle and first cycle are really where we split out plutonium and the other fission products out of that stream And at the end of the first cycle is first, second cycle is second, as you might guess. But we started that second cycle, that's operational room, this is starting the first cycle. Process, you dissolve, you run it through head end, you run it through first cycle, you run it through second cycle. Once the uranium comes out of second cycle, it's very, very pure, and it's sent outside, to our outside facilities, eventually blended down with the actual uranium, and then it's sent off to TVA. And they're able to make commercial reactors utilize that. Right now, we've had to suspend the solution because we're out of room. Once we get the cycles up and running, both of them, then we get to put that material through an outside facility, and they get dissolved material. And like I mentioned, we'll start to blend down to the uranium sometime in 2018. An important assumption we have for L area is that we're going to process enough spent fuel from L area that will then allow the facility to receive all the receipts that they are expected to receive through 2035. Otherwise, L area would have to put in additional racks to accept all of that fuel, which would be very expensive. And the canyon right now is capable of processing fuel, so the decision was to do a limited amount of fuel within L area to allow that extra room. We're also preparing to receive Canadian target residue material. That will begin in the summer of this year. I don't know how much you've heard about that campaign. We do have an agreement with the Canadians to bring in some residual liquids from the processing of molybdenum-99, from which they melt technetium-99, which is used in medical procedures. Help me out. I've had two of them, where they basically image the heart.
It's diagnosis, and they use it for diagnosis and also for actual treatment of the disease.
Then they inject you, huh? Well, it's kind of like CAT scanning, but it's, but anyway, they inject you with the technetium-99, has a very short half-life, high energy stuff, and they're actually able to image the heart and see what you had, if you have blockages. I just can't think of the thing. Anyway, so we're going to be receiving that from the Canadians starting this summer. H Canyon is also supporting HB Line, which is the facility that is the top 2 floors and the blue structure on top of the canyon. So that's the canyon. Down here, it's about 1,000 foot long, including a tunnel extension where we have, we can bring railroad cars into the canyon. So this is HB Line up top. So we're supporting an HB Line mission for the dissolution of plutonium, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on also. And of course, everything that we do in the canyon has to be highly integrated with the high-level waste system. There are, for the next several years, some limiting amounts of waste that we can send to them until they get SWT up and a few of the processes up and operate. HB Line, H Canyon is, I'm waiting for the slide to go back, is pretty much a crane-operated facility. There are 2 cranes that travel the entire length of the canyon. Pretty much everything in there is remotely handled. There are some limited areas where people can go inside the canyon, but for the most part, it's remotely operated. It's a smaller facility, and it's hands-on operation. And that's one set of the glove boxes that are in HB Line. And that is an operator right there. He is dressed out in NICs and has his gloved hands through more gloves that actually extend into the glove box. This is just an end view of the canyon, looking north. And again, there's HB Line. Those are administrative offices, support facility, which is top 2 floors. So the mission right now that the canyon is supporting an HB Line is the production of plutonium oxide that will either meet the MOX spec or would be suitable for blend down in K area. We'll talk about that in a minute. But there is some material that is non-moxable, we are planning to blend down in K area. That process can also be used if decision is made not to continue producing oxide for MOX. So, we talked about K area stores plutonium, primarily plutonium, and also some uranium. So the plutonium that Canyon is dissolving and sending up the HB line to make the suitable product for MOX is, once it's processed, it's sent back to K area for storage until needed by the MOX facility, or if we decide to blend that down for disposition to WIPP. So the second bullet, it talks about that disposition line. If we had just one line in K area and we're modifying what we call the K area interim surveillance line, which is where we do destructive examinations, which is talked about in the third bullet. But we're modifying that line to be able to blend down plutonium. Currently, we would take about 150 grams of plutonium, mix it with an inert material, and send that to WIPP. We prove that process up an HB line. When we put the process in K area, we're going to be able to do about 300 to 350 grams of plutonium in a in a different container that's called a criticality control container. But anyway, that is going to be the disposition for the non-moxable PU and possibly the PU that would be moxable. We've probably done about, right here, about 80 of these destructive examinations. We actually take cans of plutonium oxide, we cut them open, we examine the containers. This is an inner screw lid container, which is pretty much representative of what an inner container would look like. It has a screw lid, has a gasket in there. This is then put inside of an inner 3013 container, and that's DOE-standard-3013. Nothing special about the number, except that's just what it's called. Everything gets a number, right? So this is actually an inner 3013 container. This goes in here, and then this would go into an outer 3013 container, and it is welded off. Screw lid, welded, and then the outer container that this goes into is also welded. We take these, we cut them open, we look inside all the containers, we look for pitting, look for any other corrosion that might be occurring from the plutonium oxide, and we evaluate that to make sure that what we were doing would still serve a 50-year life for storage of plutonium oxide in these containers. And to date, out of the 80-some odd destructive examinations we've done, we have not found anything that's jeopardized yet that 50-year storage capability. All right, so now the L area, I mentioned that where the spent fuel has been consolidated across the site. We still do receive foreign research reactor fuels. We receive domestic research reactor fuels. The domestic research reactor fuels come from universities or from a reactor such as the high flux reactor that's up at Oak Ridge. It's a research reactor. And then the spent fuel, the foreign fuel, of course, from various foreign countries, and I think we talked for some length of time, sheet number 2 on that. Right now, we have a record of decision that we are not going to receive any more foreign research reactor fuel past May 2019, and we expect to receive domestic research reactor fuel through 2035. That date could be changed, but there is no movement right now to change that, and that is an NSA program. And as I mentioned, the processing of the Canyon will eliminate the need for installation of new storage capacity racks and others. We also have a good bit of heavy water. I mentioned that we had some C. We also have some stored in LNK, and at some point we will also have a disposition path for that material. PDF is, okay. A little messed up.
I can help you, okay.
Not a whole lot covered up. All right. Oh. Thank you. All right, so, and I mentioned live that, you know, we have the four facilities. We had H Canyon, HB Line, Ellery area, and we also had other facilities that we rely on. A couple of those are the Savannah River National Lab, which for every material, say, that's introduced into the canyon, there is flow sheet development. In other words, they specify what concentration of nitric acid, temperature, and those things that you might process with different materials. We have an analytical lab in F area, H area, that then looks at samples to make sure we're meeting for the plutonium coming out of the HB line, or the purity spec for the HEU coming out of the canyon that eventually gets blended down and goes to TVA. So those are two very important facilities. And of course, we also rely on the infrastructure of the site, you know, waste management, medical facilities, roads, things like that. There is a bit more attention now being paid to the infrastructure used at the site. I think we finally talked about it enough that people will take notice of that. A couple more pictures here. This is a vacuum salt distillation piece of equipment that's installed, I think, an HB line about 4 years ago. You can actually take oxide, say plutonium oxide that has high chlorides, chlorides can damage equipment in the canyon, and you can actually place the material under a vacuum, heat this end up, cool this end, and draw. You actually vaporize the salts and consolidate those on this end, pretty much clean the material up. That could actually be used to, and was demonstrated quite effectively to remove a high amount, a high percentage, I think 99% of chlorides in different products. This is a shot inside the caves, or the hot cells, shielded cells in SRNL. These are remote manipulators. You operate the controls out here, and you might have seen those up in SRNL. But on the other side of the very thick glass, when you move this way, the little thing in there moves this way, the little manipulator, and somebody with a lot of skill can actually take a container, unscrew a lid, pour it into something else. So anything that's very high rad can be processed up in SRNL, as long as it's not too large. All right, got a little things like this. Not too bad. Okay, so talked about the facilities that are still in operation, the facilities like, oh, I didn't mention waste on that last slide, but we do need waste is very important, solid waste, to have that capability. The canyon could not operate without that. So now we're going to talk about some of the deactive facilities. At the very end of this, or actually the next slide, there's going to be a diagram where all these dates and everything are laid out for you. I'll talk to it anyway. But we've deactivated several, talked about F Canyon, FB line, C area, P area, R area, which were reactors. I mentioned that F Canyon and FB line were sister facilities to H Canyon and HB line. But in the F Canyon, FB line, C area, we've had some deactivation. We're awaiting further deactivation, and then those will be transferred over to the D&D group. Same thing for the receiving basin for off-site fuels. That is awaiting transfer to the D&D group. Now, 235F, which when I talked about the plutonium-238, there was a facility in the canyon called HB line, which we now call old HB line, because now there's a new HB line on the top. But the old HB line was actually on the 3rd and 4th levels of the canyon. That's where we produced PU-238 from the products that were irradiated in the reactors. Those were brought over to HV line, plutonium-238 was purified, and then that was sent over to 235F. 235F took that oxide, pressed it into pellets, clad it, and then that was sent up to the Mound facility, and eventually that was made into radioactive thermal generators that were put on spacecraft. The last, of course, was Cassini, which was a big system, lots of plutonium-238, and smaller ones, the Mars rovers had half-size RTG in there. But that facility has been deactivated since the late 80s, early 90s. We have done some remediation up until recently that was rather not on a large scale. But beginning a couple of years ago, we really began to focus on reducing the risk of that facility. And we call that our risk reduction project. The goal is to remove, at one time it was about 93% of the holdup of plutonium-238 in one of the primary facilities, which is called PUF. But anyway, greater than 90% is what the goal is, and we'll probably exceed that. But the PUF stood for plutonium form, or where do I have it? Fabrication. So if you look at this, sometimes you'll hear it referred to as plutonium fuel form facility or plutonium fuel fabrication facility. But the PUF facility had 9 cells, very similar to the cells that I showed you in the picture of SRNL. There were remote manipulators here. What the operators do on the outside is mimicked on the inside. And that's where the plutonium-238, where they had presses that were pressed in pellets, and then they were able to encapsulate that with a special metal, weld it, and then send it off to Mound. But most of the plutonium-238 is in that facility, in the 235F, is in the plutonium fuel form facility. So we've actually accomplished quite a bit to date. We've removed a large amount of combustibles in 235F. So we, to a large degree, have alleviated or ameliorated a fire hazard in the facility. We have deactivated a lot of unnecessary electrical systems and also electrically isolated the PUF cells 6 through 9. So on one side, you've got PUF cells 1 through 5 and 6 through 9 on the other side. And we've electrically isolated half of those PUF cells. But if you have no power or electrical systems that can lead to a fire and you've removed the combustible, you have really done a lot to put that facility in a much safer situation. So now the next step, well, we actually have done some better measurements now over the years. We've done about 3 measurements that I'm aware of since 1990. And every time we do that, we have better equipment and better means of assaying the material that's in there. But the next step is going to be going into those cells that have the highest loading and actually remove that material and either stabilize it or put it in a safe configuration and get it out of this very, very old part that I talked about. Everybody has copies, probably you can see. So if you were looking at our system plan, this chart would extend out for decades. And I'll just run down some of the dates. If I had a full chart here, it'd be very small, nice type. But these are the main missions that are ongoing in those 4 major facilities. So in H Canyon, which is where the spent fuel dissolver is and fuse dissolver, we've completed the sodium reactor experiment fuel. We've now moved on to doing set fuel for uranium recovery and then blend down like we've done before, send that off to TVA. And then we'll also begin dissolving the high flux reactor fuel from Oak Ridge. That mission right now, this arrow would extend you out until about FY 23 or 24. Same thing for the PU dissolving. that is currently ongoing in support of, a future, feed for MOX, if that decision remains. Again, about 23 or 24. Those are kind of joined at the hip because economically, if you're doing one, it makes sense to do the other. The H Canyon truck well is where we are getting ready to receive the Canadian liquid. Like I said, we will be starting up this summer, and right now, schedule-wise, we're looking at about July for receipt and processing of that material. We will actually take these liquids and blend them with the spent nuclear fuel that we were dissolving or will be dissolving again from L area and process that together, producing a good HEU product, blend that down with natural uranium, making enriched uranium, and again, sending that off to TVA. And so here are the preps for the TVA, blend down to get it done. K area, I talked about the core mission, of course, is storage of plutonium and a little bit of uranium. And in K area, we also do the 3013 destructive evaluation to make sure we still have a viable storage option for up to 50 years of the 3013. And then we also do 9975. There are O-rings and other things that seal the 9975, and we're looking at how often we might have to go in and repack the 9975 for storage. And of course, L area, we receive foreign research fuel, we receive domestic research fuel. L area also ships fuel to H Canyon for processing up here. And then SRNL for experiments, we've done a little bit of that. The other thing that was being evaluated slowly at this point due to funding, but is what do we do with the rest of the fuel that's in L area? Do we process that in the canyon, the rest of that, or do we develop a dry storage capability? So going back up, I talked about dates. So 23-24, 23-24. That would be about 18 or 19. FY 18-19 will start this year, and that's about a 1.5 to 3 year mission. The blend down would occur pretty much in lockstep with 24, FY 24, sending that on to TVA. This really starts getting in the out years, FY 39, plus or minus, depending on how much PU we eventually blend down and how many lines we have operating. Like I said, for the non-moxable PU, if we were just doing non-moxable PU and we had one blend down line in K area, that would take us to about 2039, 2040, something like that. L area is really dependent, on buttons. L area is really dependent on what we do with the rest of the spent fuel. The spent fuel that we're dissolving up here, I didn't mention, but we're going to dissolve about a third of what's there. What we will have left to find a disposition path is about 2/3 of that is there or we expect to see. So that, I'll let Maxine. So how long would these arrows extend?
Well, actually, the way that we have it on the roadmap and in the liability life cycle, it actually goes to 2065 because we have to wait till a repository is ready, and that current date is 2045. We know we will not be the first site to go to that repository, so we put in some time, and that's why it's 2065 to actually remove all the fuel from that area. If we go to the dry storage.
That allowed me to take a drink of water. Thank you. Thank you. So, and that, on what your assumptions are and so forth for when that is constructed. So, just a wrap-up slide, and I threw in some extras here. Starting with the Canadian liquid. This is a target residue material pig. That's what we call the Canadian liquid. Target residue is what's left over after they extract the Moly 99. In a pig, this is actually shielded. The containers, and I didn't go into a whole lot, but we're actually gonna ship those containers in a LWT cask, which is used as kind of a workhorse for L area, for NRU, NRX fuels, and a few other things across the complex. But we're gonna use that to put the liquid containers in. Those get put into the shielded pig, which has lead on the outside to knock down the rat fuel from that. This is another picture taken by the Cassini spacecraft. This was a moon of the Horizon Cassini. I think it has like 15 or 20 or 25 moons, a bunch of them.
Saturn.
Not a moon. What did he say?
Cassini.
That was so long, it doesn't move.
And it has big. Yeah.
That's what's on.
And that mission is still going on. If you're interested, you can go to the JPL website and look at that. But a lot of interesting science coming out of that. Okay, and the only thing here is that I don't know if you remember a year or two ago, we had some really cool clouds that settled over the area. Somebody snapped this picture from the H Canyon roof, and to me, it was just really, really cool. So, I mean, nothing other than just something cool to stick in here. I talked about the 3013 container, and that's the inner part. What you're looking at is the actual outer part, very, very heavy stainless steel. And again, that has a 50-year design storage life. Just another very neat picture. This is actually H Canyon's second level, which if you're ever out there on a tour, you can actually walk into this part of the canyon and look around. It's quite, use the word pretty. But back in the 90s, we've done a lot of radiological rollback. You used to have to dress out in anti-contamination clothing in there. We spent a good bit of time to make that a much easier area to access, which makes operations a lot quicker, and your operators don't have to dress into NICs and then dress back out of NICs. So I didn't get any questions. Well, let me talk about a few of the props here that I brought. So I talked about the mission that we had in the canyon back to 2003 to 2011 when we were shipping a lot of uranium to TVA. This is actually just the end of a piece of a 14-foot fuel tube, site reactor fuel that we would have been dissolving back then. But they were about 14 feet long. That's just a small end piece of that. We have pretty solutions here. These are not radioactive, but that would be typical of the color of uranium that's processed in the canyon. Neptunium, which I didn't talk a whole lot about, and then plutonium is pretty blue color, and it'll actually change color depending on the acidity of the thing and the valence of the different solutions. I talked about fuel bundles, or at least I think I did. I know I used the word on the slides there. So this is actually a fuel assembly, and a material, this is representative of a material test reactor assembly. They come in various shapes, but not too much different from this. When these get stored in L area, they'll crop off the excess uranium, aluminum, not cutting into the uranium that's in the fuel tube. You can then take about 3 or 4 of these, depending on the size, and then you can then bundle. It's been a long day. You can then bundle 3 or 4 of those into what we call an L area tube. I can get the cap off. Anyway, this cap removes off of this. This would be about 14 feet long or so, and this is called an L area bundle tube, I guess. And you can put about 3 or 4 of those in here. This is actually what gets brought over to the canyon and put into the dissolver. So one of the first pictures is kind of yellow. You're actually looking at a bundle that's being installed and sorted into the dissolve for dissolution. No, any questions? Yes, ma'am.
How much HEU is still stored in K area?
Not a whole lot, not a whole lot. Most of all the good stuff has been dissolved.
Why is it still there? Why hasn't it been dispositioned?
It will be with the other plutonium. I mean, what you have.
Uranium, is it,
Uranium,
the
yeah.
HEU?
But it's a mixture.
Oh, it's the
All the
contaminated,
good stuff is really gone.
and so it's
What's
PU
there is,
contaminated.
It would not be worth the trouble or the cost to
Is any,
extract the uranium that's still there.
is any more of that coming onto the site?
I mean, there's a possibility that we could get other good uranium from other sites, but, those decisions have not been made. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Susan Corbett. I have a few questions. So the plutonium isotope that they use in the Cassini, is that 238 or 239? Which?
That's 238.
238. That only has a half-life of like, what, about 50 years?
80.3 years, I think, or something close to that. Of course, plutonium-239 is the isotope used in weapons, and it's millions of years. But, generally, materials that have a short half-life, say, 88 years is relatively short, tends to give off more dose or more radiation, but also tends to give off more heat. So it's really that half-life that tends to lends to, the characteristics of the material to be good for a heat source.
And then the sodium reactor fuel, is that the old sodium reactor that was out in Simi Valley, or what?
Sorry, it's in California. I think that was Simi Valley, south.
That's still around, that's a long time ago.
Totally gone.
Yeah, the reactor,
So you just fuel, it's the fuel from that one? the Simi
right,
Valley?
and we've dissolved it.
I see, it's gone.
It
Okay.
was stored for a long time. Was it damaged? It was declassed, yes, declassed.
But because of the thorium, we couldn't, the uranium was no longer any good to, a fuel fabricator because it had U-232 and U-233, which is a high dose. So none of the fuel fabricators in the U.S. would use it, so it was easier just to disposition all of that material to the waste tank.
It's relatively a small amount of uranium.
So that went into the tank farm, right?
Yes.
Right, and that's, I talked about a third of that is gone over to DWTF. And we send it directly to DWTF. We don't even have to go through the tank farm, so it's a bit more efficient to send it to DWTF. We've sent about a third of that so far.
Now, those little things that you showed us that have a 50-year life, after 50 years, what do you do?
Well, it could be that we find out that, you could store it in here for 60 years.
How will you know? How will you know?
So, I mean, based on, well, if the containers remain as we continue to open containers and analyze the contents and analyze the metal, if it is relatively unscathed, if the thickness that is there is still thick enough to support, the pressures, the low pressures that might be developed in such things. We also measure pressure on these containers before we cut them open. We actually see what's happening pressure-wise inside the container. But based on pressure, based on damage to the container from the plutonium oxide and other things, you can determine whether or not those containers would still be suitable for storage of plutonium.
So can the material be repackaged if you find one
Oh,
that's
yeah.
not?
Oh, yeah.
to be
Clearly, yes.
Packaged at that time?
Yeah. We would have to actually put that capability into K-Area. Currently,
Have
that
that capability
capability does not exist. And we don't really see the need for that capability. Now, right now, if we were to ship the material to the MOX facility for use at that facility, we would have to put a capability in there to weld some of the containers that we have open, and we've taken the oxide and examined it and restored it. It's currently not in a welded container. Some of that's been brought over to HB Line for dissolution a few years ago, but we would have to install that capability. For right now, if we're actually opening up a 9975, taking it out, cutting it open, repackaging it, we don't have that full capability. We could put that in.
And just one more point to expand. The 50-year capability, when this standard, DOE standard was created, you had to have a time frame to do analysis, okay? And so it time we created that, said, well, how long do you think we could store this? So when you analyze how well the storage container can survive, we could have picked 1,000 years, 20 years, 5 years, anything. So you say, let me analyze this to see if it can be safe for 50 years. And anything up to, so you can do all the, as Jay said, the structural analysis, the pressure evaluation, the corrosions, and you can document this container can survive 50 years. That doesn't mean that is the end of the expected life. As Jay said, with this data, we're not seeing anything of significance that would compromise it. So 50 years was like, let's pick something that we can analyze it to.
So what is that material again? Is that stainless steel?
That's the same steel, yes.
So there's a lot of,
Research out there about how stainless steel reacts in
environments and things. I mean, it seems like you could have a pretty more accurate, more
Right.
guess.
We actually, and yeah, we are experts in that field,
Right.
okay? And so everything we have done has confirmed that nothing will compromise that 50-year storage. Just like we could analyze this chair, how long is this chair last? Yeah, I don't know. I think it's going to last 25 years. It doesn't mean it's graded and I can't use it for another 25 years. It's just a point of reference in which to do analysis.
I understand. And then one last question. So all of the stuff that's going on in H Canyon now goes into, most of it goes into the tank farm, the tanks, right?
Well, the waste, yeah.
Right. And so which tank is being used? I know I've asked this before and I can't remember. Which tank, the number of tanks that are going into now?
Tank 39 is primarily the tank over in H area, or high level waste. Like I said, the sodium reactor experiment, dissolved fuel actually goes directly to DWPF, and I forget
So
the tank there.
what is the life expectancy of tank 39 in terms of how long it will be before it gets filled?
That's on the other side of the fence. Oh, you mean before it's filled?
Yeah.
Oh, well, they continue to draw material off of that tank and process it through the rest of the,
So is it going out faster than it's coming in, or is it about the same? I mean,
yeah, I'm not an expert on it, but there is sufficient room that they remove enough material from that tank to suit our purposes.
Mike Michelinas, I used to be the engineering director at the tank farm, so I think I can answer that. We can draw down tank 39 as fast as we need to. We coordinate with the tank farm, coordinates with the canyon anytime some waste material is discharged to 39, and we make sure there's enough room to take whatever transfer they're going to do, and when it starts to get full, it's moved to the other tanks and evaporated and condensed down.
so you can actually move it to another tank?
Yes.
I see. So is 39 the only?
When they bring the solution over, most of it is liquid. There's some solids that come in. The solids will settle down to the bottom, and we'll move the supernatant off. I won't be alive when we fill that up with sludge. In fact, we won't fill it with sludge. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
That's how we maintain it.
and not everything goes to the tank farm. The uranium that's recovered doesn't go to the tank farm at all.
And to finish with your first question there on the 50 years, so if you look at the 2039 date, that's still within the 50 years. So we foresee with what we know now that we could be storing material up to about 2039, 2040 something. But that's still well within that 50 years. And this date down here, there's nothing magic about that, except we subtracted 5 years to continue doing the destructive examination. So let's say this moved out to about 2045. We might continue to do the destructive examinations until 2040. But at some point, if you're at the edge of having all that material gone, then you probably don't need to look any further at what's going on. You pretty well have it characterized.
And Jay, there's a complex group, a complex line of experts that look at the 3013 standards, look at the results that we're getting from the destructive examination, and they're the ones that make the decisions. It's not just the Savannah River site decision on the storage.
Right.
It's a complex wide look.
It's called the MIS committee, and I always have to ask Alan Gunner what that stands for. I have it written down on my wall. I don't recall. Jeff will know.
Yeah. Material identification and surveillance.
Yeah.
And key point about that is it has a rigorous program. hear about destructive evaluation, this is done for this program because it takes cans from every different type of background that might be in that can, and it takes them out on a regular basis from each category plus random samples, and then they cut them open and look for any signs of corrosion or pressurization. That's part of it. They also have a non-destructive evaluation program that x-rays cans to make sure the lids aren't deflecting or up. That's a key part. They go inside these cans and make sure, they look very carefully to see if there's been any corrosion during the 5 or 10 years it's been packaged.
So one of the things you might do before you cut the can open as part of the non-destructive evaluation, you look for bulging in the can. And there are actually, on the outer can, there's a little button that's welded there, and everything is machined flat. And you can look at that button and see if it's extending above the rim of the can to see if there's any deflection, then that would indicate that there is some pressurization going on in the can. There's also a program out of Lanold that we fund that also goes along with this for the long-term storage PU. So they've actually got, material coupons and things out there, pieces, samples of the same material that we use in storage, and they subject that to PU and I guess in maybe higher concentrations of material or chlorides or whatever than what we store to look at what the accelerated effects might be of the damage to the containers.
Let me make sure I understood this, but right now you don't have a way to repackage that.
No, but again, we don't see any need to install that capability. We could put one in. Yes, sir.
Jay, Joe Ortell, Public. You mentioned that some of these medical isotopes are coming from Canada. To the best of my knowledge, we don't have any reactors in the United States producing medical isotopes.
No, we don't.
They're all coming from Canada and Europe.
There are some companies like General Atomics and some others that are looking at.
Yeah, but there's none now.
No, but there are some European countries and the Canadians.
Now, you said they're going to stop taking spent fuels from Europe in the not too distant future. Is that going to impact anything as far as getting medical isotopes in the United States?
Not the isotopes themselves, bringing back any fuel that might be used for the generation of.
Yeah, no, that's
but not the medical isotopes.
It's beyond the scope of what you guys probably know, but is anybody in Washington looking at that? That if we don't take foreign fuels coming back, is that going to prevent somebody from making medical isotopes that have to come to the United States?
I don't believe so, but
NNSA has a program to look at vendors that may be able to produce medical isotopes in the United States using LEU versus the ATU. So there is a MOLY 99 program that NNSA is funding to try and bring those vendors online in the United States.
You know, we don't have any now.
We do not have any
There's no
now.
timetable as to when we're going to have any.
They're working that time. I don't know the exact time frame of each of the vendors, but there's vendors that are in
Yeah,
competition to do that.
I mean, we used to do it in this country, but Oak Ridge used to do it. And then we shut down reactors at Oak Ridge, and then they can't do it. So my point is, that's something you guys might kind of keep. It's outside of the scope, I realize that, but it's something that, people should. I had a nuclear stress test back several years ago, and I had to wait a couple of months.
that's what nuclear stress test.
Vacation is something else slips my mind. But then people get on waiting lists for months to get those tests done now. If anybody has a problem in Canada, Netherlands, I think supply a bunch of them, and maybe some other outfits that do it. But I sure hope somebody in Washington is looking at this.
Like I said,
And I hate to see somebody can't do it because they don't have a place to spend fuel.
right. I know that there were 4 or 5 companies that were floating various ideas for generating that, like Maxine said. One of them is General Atomics. So if you go off and look at that on the internet. Yes, sir.
Jay, first time I've ever had to say this, we've always finished early. We're overtime now. I just want to thank you for your presentation. I got another committee meeting after this one. We don't want to even
wait till then, this is done deal.
I have a suggestion, but I don't want to
Definitely,
take it.
definitely. The facts are the facts. Yes, we can get this thing through. It can go before the, and I don't know if we want to just go beyond that.
Well, it's a moot point. Go ahead, Maxine, if you could.
If David wants to submit through the normal process right now as an individual,
Yeah,
I have a chance to get them into the document and
that
get
can be,
responses to. If you want to wait till the cab, I won't have a chance to get them into the document. And I know that other cab members have done that, both Jenny and Susan and Nina, and even Dan at the public. So if he wants to do that, then those comments can go in as he feels they need to go in, and won't respond.
So just comments from the public, not from the cab.
So, could you do that, and then we could have the meeting in May, and
Yes, but there were no committee meetings before that.
David, I think the only choice we have at this point is for you to submit that as a member of the public. Much as I hate to say it, but it looks like that's where we are with
Well,
it.
here's my request. Regardless of whether they can incorporate the comments into the EA, I think it's important for the CAB to make their position known on this proposal.
I agree.
And so I would like to submit these comments for adoption by the full board in our next full board meeting, regardless of whether they can be incorporated into the EA or not.
I agree with that. Let's do that.
Would it also be appropriate, Dave, to, I think we all have received this via email, that we as a committee encourage the board members to individually edit this as they so choose, disagree with it if they so choose, submit it on their own behalf. You've done an excellent job of surmising some of the points I even made at the presentation and when it originally came out. So, I mean, I'd love to support you on this because I'm in full agreement that speaking with actual Germans, they have no problem with keeping this. And that's their common understanding is they actually wonder why the Americans are crazy enough to ask for it back.
We did not ask for it back. The German ministry asked for our assistance.
Okay, so maybe I'm generalizing a public statement from a couple Germans that I personally know on the matter, but that being said, their consensus from the public is they don't need the Americans to bail them out on such a low-risk item. And not to be too contentious, but if we talk about risk states, Germany didn't have a 9/11. We had our Pentagon hit. So if we think proliferation issues are just based on who happened to have the last terrorism act, we need to exclude the entire United States.
Well, there is that. Well, if you follow that train of thought, basically come to us saying that
If you're
almost
gonna
like
So the
the
next
world
meeting
is down.
starts at 6:30? Meeting starts at 6:30.
That was just the most recent thing. It needs to happen all the
Okay,
time.
ladies and gentlemen, what we're down to is we don't have a decision to make. David, you put some hard work into it, man, and I appreciate it, and I think it's a great work. But at this point in time, I don't think that we have a choice. I think you're gonna have to submit this. I think, Dan's got a good point. As many of us as can should read this, formulate their own, and send it in as a member of the public, and, I think that's all we can do.
Could some of us also maybe have the option of signing the letter jointly with
I don't see why not.
David?
I don't see why not.
Rather than everybody
Yeah.
send
Not
their
as
own?
members of the council. Not as members.
No, as an individual.
So let me make sure, Pat, for review, it's a matter of process, okay? So, I understand you're out of time, and I know another meeting's getting ready to start. However, I think this is important business that if we defer 5 minutes or so, I think it's reasonable, but this is your meeting, okay? But I think as Harold said and Larry said, before anything can go to the full board for a vote or not vote to formally send it over to DOE, this committee has to make a recommendation. And again, if someone very quickly wants to make a motion and you get a second, I think within 30 seconds, you can at least, from what's written here, at least make a motion to take it forward. In the interim between now and the May, June, whatever, May meeting, you can do what Daniel said, is to get comments and work it through. But it may be fairly quick, but Harold, if that's what you want to do, but I just want to make sure you at least have all the options.
Sorry, out of my mouth. I would like to move that we forward these comments for adoption by the full board.
Okay, we have a
Call
motion.
for-
Is there a second? Okay. All in favor, say aye. Raise your right hand. All opposed? Any abstentions? Yep. Okay, so it's,
It'll move to the full board. Yes. In the meantime, do amongst yourselves and, you know, do.
And again, just recognize, just as I think the committee said, more likely it will be too late to be actually considered, but I agree with what your statements are. At least you'll be on record, okay? At least it'll be submitted. If you submitted them individually, I know people have their own opinions. It's not gonna be weighed as much as that group. And that's not true. You're entitled to your own opinion, whether you believe that or not, but all comments will be weighed, okay? So again, I encourage you as public citizens to do what you need to do, all right?
And the websites are still open for those comments to come in. Those sites are still available. They'll be available indefinitely right now. Thank you, Larry, for stimulus to run the meeting over.
man, Larry, yeah, we'll do this,
We lost the state about 4 or 5. Somebody died.
Oh, no. Smell like that again here.
That would be you.
I'm becoming very cynical.
There was a
Yeah, we actually did.
We're about to begin.
All right, people, we got 1 minute. We got to begin. I'd like to thank everybody for showing up here. The community center, New Ellington, going to begin the Waste Management Committee meeting. I'm here. We have Virginia Jones, the Vice Chair, Louis Chavis, Erwin Nennis, Don Gillis, David Hoyle, Daniel Kaminsky, and John McMichael are my members. Is our committee purpose moving forward. We ask that we all be polite to one another because this is being recorded live, so please make clear statements, but most of all, respect everybody's opinion and be polite. We will need to keep the agenda on topic. There will be a public comment period shortly after our presentation. We have a sign-up sheet in the back, so if you want to make your comments, please sign up now. The Waste Management Committee has no open recommendation, no draft recommendations to be discussed tonight. We will have a presentation, point of contact status update by Jeff Bentley, DOE SR, and we'll have a systems overview presentation, liquid waste systems overview, Pete Hill, SRR, and shortly after we'll have a committee discussion and public announcement for acknowledgement. So with that, Jeff Bentley. Yes.
In case you don't know me, I'm Jeff Bentley. I took over for Cindy Blanco. I'm with the Liquid Waste Program for DOE. I'm the Saltstone Program Manager, and I also oversee a lot of the tank farm projects. I'm just here to give you a little update on the Liquid Waste Program. As far as the tank closure, we're currently grouting tank 12. It is probably, best estimate, 99% complete. They're at the point that they're grouting the risers and the equipment. you know, that just takes a little bit more time. You know, these are smaller things that they have to figure out. And, but they're still on schedule to meet that May 31st date. Actually, I think they're still on schedule to finish this month. As far as the tank closure season removal, the TCCR, it's still in the evaluation of proposals. And that's, I mean, that's the last information I was given. Over at the Defense Waste Processing Facility, they are operating 25 canisters so far this year, and that gives us a total of 4,043 canisters. With the Saltstone Processing Facility, currently is not operating. We had gone out for an outage to do some tie-in work for STU-6 and for the Salt Waste Processing Facility. The tie-in work for the disposal unit is just about done. There's a little bit remaining, but that is not affecting the facilities from running. There's two things. We have the Salt Waste Processing Facility work is not completed yet, and they're implementing a new, a revised DSA over at Saltstone. So those two things are preventing it from coming back up right at the moment. We have the new salt solution receipt tank, the 60,000 gallon tank that we're about to bring online. They're going to be running, I think April 25th, the week of April 25th is the schedule to, I guess it's a facility assessment that you're going to do on that week. And then a couple weeks later, the week of May 9th, they will actually run a readiness assessment for those salt solution receipt tanks. For the fiscal year so far, though, Saltstone has processed 420,470 gallons of low-level waste into grout. Over at ARP-MCU, the MCU is operational, and it has processed a total of 451,035 gallons of salt waste so far this year. The operations, the filter, the crossflow filter that we have for the actinide removal process is operating well. It's actually running 10 gallons per minute, which is far beyond what we've ever seen before. And MCU also operating well. It's about 6 gallons per minute, and this is very, it's consistent. The Saltstone Disposal Unit 6, I mentioned the tie-in work that was happening. But the cell itself is complete. The construction of the cell is complete. As you know, it failed its first water tightness test. And the first repair attempt was unsuccessful. We have received an alternate repair method and path forward, and DOE is currently evaluating that recommendation. Let's see. The salt waste processing facility is not much has changed. It still has the construction completion scheduled date for December of this year, and the operation to begin by December of 2018. And over at Solid Waste Management Facility, this is special for David over here. We've disposed of 2,539 cubic meters of low-level solid waste, and another 675 cubic meters of low-level waste from the Naval Reactor Program. The facility has also shipped, looks like 17.7 cubic meters of the mixed low-level waste off-site. And then there's nothing new to report on the true waste. It's still looking as though operations will resume at the, the waste isolation pilot plant in February of next year. And that's it.
Jeff, I have a quick question, Earl Shepherd, Cab. When you said they, failed the first leak test, so that means you have to drain the tank completely and start all over again once you make your repairs and bring it back up?
So yes. So the first time they do the leak test, they fill it up. It failed. They had to completely drain it. They then went and applied they injected an epoxy into some, I don't know all the, I think it was, Pete, it was the floor, the wall.
Yeah.
But it was like the joints. But I know they injected a bunch of epoxy. After they did that, they didn't fill it all the way up. They filled it up several feet and saw that it was still leaking. So they've since drained that, and now they've proposed a method of path forward. Once that's approved and accepted, the way to, agreed upon the way to go, they'll do another repair, and they will have to fill it all the way back up again and add dye again, okay, to see that if it leaks.
And my second question is that potable water, or is that just water that's coming in from the Savannah River? What are we?
Well water.
So it's well water, so pretty clean water.
Yes.
Two questions. The evaporator leak, which area is that? Is that waste management, nuclear materials? What's going on with that?
As far as the evaporator goes, I mean, I have nothing new from the full board meeting. It's still evaluating first repair, still evaluating path forward on the procurement of the new one.
But I'm just really in shock about it, because the construction date on that was 2002. I mean, it's very recent.
Yeah.
So now we've got this thing that we're filling with water, and it's got leaks. What is going on? And how reliable is this, like the evaporator leak?
The evaporator failure was definitely not expected. As you said, it was like, I think it was 2002, just early 2000 timeframe that it was put in. I believe the service life was supposed to be 30 years. So that we still don't know exactly where the leak is.
Yeah, Jim Folk, Dewey, let me just address that a little bit. Two very different leaks, very different systems, completely unrelated, step one, okay? The 3H evaporator, you asked where it was, that is each tank farm, okay? So it's used for evaporation of a significant amount of our excess liquids. The vessel itself had a 30-year design life, and about 15 years in, we have an issue. So again, it's one of those things where it looks like all the proper steps, proper approaches were taken to the construction and build. Sometimes stuff happens. We don't have that answer yet. We're going in and doing a pretty thorough investigation. Matter of fact, they started in last week with actually going in and doing some visual examination. Got a camera in there now to start what the cause may have been, and maybe what a repair approach might be if that turns out to be the option. Move over to SDU6. From that, we've had an SRR has had a series of experts in. We've had the Corps of Engineers in to take a look at it for us, and then several of the parent companies like Bechtel and AECOM and the like have come in to help us take a look and see what might be going on there. Got a lot of good lessons learned. We're going to be applying to the future SDU7 and beyond. And in the meantime, they looked at about 24, I think it is, different approaches to go and do a repair on SDU6. So again, they're kind of weaning those down, making a recommendation to us that we're starting to take a look at. So again, very different.
Okay, I appreciate that. Just going back on the SDU6, I had concerns when it was first built about the gigantic size and the scientific knowledge and background and research that went into it. And then when the leaks developed, I thought, oh, did they research this thing? What's going on?
Well, again, we took this from commercial design. They build these things, and for for public water use. Syracuse is where, most recently, where they built some more in Atlanta. So we really were drawing off of a design. Now, we tweaked it a little bit, for our specific use, but the bottom line I want everybody to take away from here is when we started the process, we promised a leak-tight tank, okay? That's what we're gonna end up with. So it's not gonna be a pencil whip, well, will you accept a little leak versus a big leak? No, our expectation, our demand on the contractor is by the time we're all said and done, it will be leak-tight. So that's what we're after. I'm sorry, Jeff.
You don't be too alarmed on the fact that it leaked on the leak tightness test, because it's not uncommon for these concrete vaults to leak. That's the whole purpose of doing the test and ensuring that we do seal the leaks before we put it into operation.
I presume this is a separate contract to construct SDU 6. It's not being constructed by SRR, right?
Right, that was, the DNR tanks, I believe.
DN tanks, it's a subcontract to SRR.
So was the contract predicated on them delivering a leak-tight tank?
Yes.
So they're on the hook to deliver.
And I'm not gonna get into a contractual issue between SRR and DN tanks. Again, my contract is with SRR. They're gonna deliver a leak-tight tank. Now, how that transposes into subcontracts and the like, okay, I'm gonna let their.
It's SRR subcontract.
Yes, yes.
Question. What is the thickness of the floor of this unit?
I do not know that off the top of my head. If you want, I can get that for you and information.
You emptied the tank, went back in and put epoxy in. Then whether or not epoxy was successful and you had another leak area, or is it leaking in the same area?
I don't think you can tell.
Yeah, and I don't have a picture of it with me, but there are a significant number of cracks. And just put it in perspective, we're talking about 0.3, 3 millimeters, I guess, is about the biggest size they've seen. But we're talking very, very small cracking, okay? But it is significant. There's a fair amount of it. And the other part of it is that what we've done is there's about 1,600 linear feet of floor joints already by design. So, we poured it in, I think it was about 10 sections. So you have a significant number of floor joints that could be the cause of the leak itself, okay? And then you have some of this additional cracking. So they went in and they injected that epoxy into those floor joints and also then tried to patch some of this cracking on the floor. Between the two, you can't really tell because all you see is dampness on the outside. So you really can't make a distinction. Did one process work or another one did?
With, quantifiably, how much water is it leaking?
If I recall, there was a fair amount, but I believe the standard was less than 1 gallon per minute. Okay? It was under that standard. It was still enough you could see leakage, but it was still under that standard. So it kind of puts a little bit in perspective for you.
But it wasn't flooding the surrounding area or anything like that. Okay. It's always good to be able to qualify.
So, being new to the committee, asking a redundant question, maybe other committee members already know, but how solid is the salt that's going to be stored in that tank?
Oh, when
Does it remain liquid?
No, it becomes a solid major.
Does it have the relative density of water? Is it heavier or lighter than the test? Much heavier?
Water was 8.34 pounds.
But then that kind of brings suspect to the tank after you put something much heavier than water in it for settling, cracking. Concrete does crack.
But then you're wrapped in miles of steel.
Okay.
I was just gonna say, something I wanted to circle back and I apologize, I should have, no. Jimmy, you said that, that it was common occurrence, whatever you saw was common. So when the experts were looking at this, that they weren't surprised with anything they found. It was a fairly
So they made some recommendations for us.
Okay.
I think the biggest one, and the easiest one to look at is, we did partition the floor, made it like in 10 bunks.
Right.
They question on why that approach was taken. Okay, so for instance, in industry, apparently, they'll make runs. So, instead of a checkerboard design,
Right.
okay, they'll make it like lanes, okay? And again, when you get in with the real techies into this business, they tell you that stress along those connecting points is what drives into cracking up. By introducing those extra checkerboard patterns, you've increased that likelihood for cracking along the side. So again, it's one of those things where it looks good at the time. The experts will come in and say, you probably really shouldn't have done it that way. You should have done it this way. That'll be the lesson learned. So step one is fix what you got, and that's the tasking SRR has. Step two is to take that lesson learned now as you look ahead to the next one. And maybe you don't do the checkerboard, maybe you do that lane type of pouring of the floor.
Well, I appreciate you bearing with me. I've worked with tanks many years ago when they first came out with fiberglass tanks, holding tank, and steel tanks, and each one of them have their own separate little idiosyncrasies when you put them in place and you function.
And again, don't forget, we built 4 smaller versions of these. One of those had a leak.
Okay.
Okay, we went back in, said, well, what are we gonna do? We looked at it. Actually, in that one, we poured an additional floor. Okay, so, just increase the floor thickness by a certain amount to take care of the leak.
Yeah, I just appreciate it.
And that was the point. It's not uncommon, it happens, and we've been there before, we fixed it. And certainly.
I just appreciate you and your folks staying on top of it to get it right.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
And one follow-up question on the Syracuse tank that was based on, was that filled also with ground, what density?
No, that was for public water.
So that was,
They
that
actually use
was
it
not
for
the same.
water, and, a lot of times, they'll have a leak in that same thing, and they may not even repair it at that small of a rate, because it's very small amount. To them, it doesn't matter. Yeah, there you go.
And especially in wastewater, it'll seal itself the first time you fill it. But in this case, you're working with some dangerous stuff, so you gotta get it right, and get it right, and get it right. So, yeah.
But the one with the tank was an overrun, sealed underneath it, just not the right word. There is no protection against a leak after it's done, right? There's no annulus or anything like that.
There's still a collection mechanism underneath that tank.
Ah, okay.
David?
Jeff, what can you tell us about ongoing negotiations with the state on not meeting the SWPF date?
I can say I can't.
Yeah, hasn't really changed much since the full committee meeting. They have, the state has submitted to us their recommendation for closure of an agreement in principle, if you will. We're reviewing that, and at the right time, we'll be getting back to with them on a counter proposal. So again, I think Jack had mentioned the last time, we have had the discussions, we have exchanged some information. State has formally given us something to look at. We're reviewing it, and we'll respond hopefully fairly soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. Now we have Pete Hill.
I am Pete Hill, acting manager for systems execution strategy for Savannah River remediation. I also own the group that does the liquid waste system plan. I've got an overview presentation here I'll run through. I know we're starting a little late. Talked for up to 2 hours on this slide presentation, so you just give me the sign when I've been talking too long. I just love talking about this stuff. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so, it all started in 1950s with President DuPont to build the Savannah River plant as a redundant facility to the Hanford site to produce special nuclear materials for the weapons programs. Next slide. The Savannah River site is 310 square miles, 5 reactors, 2 separation facilities. Quick, construction schedule started in 1951. The first reactor, our reactor, began operation, Christmas 1953. The 2 separation facilities, you have F Canyon, H Canyon. F Canyon began November 1954. That's when they generated the first waste. It was put into tanks 1 through 8. And H Canyon began July 1955. Likewise, the first tanks there were 9, 10, 11, 12, receiving first waste, also 1955. Just a picture there, that's a P reactor down low. Here's F Canyon, and the tank farms were designed to receive the waste from the spent fuel processing in F Canyon. The purpose was to recover PU-239 in the reactor. Target assembly constructed of uranium-238 was bombarded with neutrons. The U-238 then would become uranium-239, which decayed into PU-239. Those targets were taken to F Canyon and initially H Canyon, dissolved in nitric acid. The plutonium and some of the uranium were extracted, and everything else, all the fission products, were dumped to the waste tank. Here is Fish Canyon. It's kind of sitting on end right there. Here is H Tank Farm. You can hear about ARPMC is right in there. The 3H evaporator we're talking about is right there. This is all H Tank Farm as well. As I mentioned, H area initially was designed for to extract and collect the PU-239, but late 50 years of operation, that F Canyon had sufficient capacity. So H Canyon was repurposed to recover U-235 from the reactor fuel that was not spent in the during the process of the reactor. And just like the plutonium, in this case, the fuel rods were dissolved, uranium is extracted along with the neptunium, and all the fission products are dumped to the waste tanks. I heard it mentioned in the nuclear materials subcommittee, but the H Canyon also did some PU-238 recovery for the space program. But again, if it wasn't the desired product, everything else was dumped to the waste tanks. A picture of some waste tanks under construction. You can see the people there, give you a little size perspective. Once they're constructed, they are backfilled with dirt, so if you went to the tank farms today, you would just see the tops of the tank. They're nominally 85 feet in diameter. The bottom of the tank is about 40 feet below the surface where you're walking. The tanks themselves are roughly 35 feet tall. They are a couple different sizes. I'll describe those. So that brings us to the liquid waste mission. You know, our job is to safely receive and store liquid radioactive waste into stable, inert solids, and then close the tanks when they're empty. Talked about the different lines. There are 4 types. Type 1 tanks were the first constructed. That's 1 through 8 in F area and 9 through 12 in H area. They're 750,000 gallons. These tanks have a secondary pan, kind of like think about a teacup on a saucer. So it's not full secondary containment, but the pan is 5 feet high on the side. Tanks 5 and 6, which have been closed, and tank 12, as Jeff mentioned, that we're closing, are the type 1 tank. The next 4 tanks constructed are type 2 tanks. That would be 13, 14, 15, and 16 in H area. Essentially the same design, just a little larger. They also have the 5-foot pan. Tank 16 that was closed recently is a type 2 tank. I'll skip to the type 4 tanks. I can't explain why the type 4 tanks were built before the type 3. The tanks 17 through 20 and 21 through 24 17 through 20 are in F area. All 4 of those have been grouted. 21 through 24 are in H area. Those will be some of the last tanks of the older style tanks to be grouted. These tanks were initially designed for lower heat waste from the canyons, so they do not have cooling coils in them, and they do not have secondary containment. They do have an underliner sump for any kind of leak detection. As I mentioned, they don't have cooling coils. The type 1, 2, and 3 tanks do have cooling coils. That does bring us then to the type 3 tanks. These are the newest tanks, 25 through 51. They have cooling coils and a full secondary tank around the interior tank. Oftentimes I hear these called the new style tanks. Some terminology that's around is compliant tanks, whereas the ones without full secondary containment are sometimes called non-compliant. These would be the last tanks to be closed. And feel free to ask questions while presenting if you desire. Sometimes it's easier than to go back to the slides themselves. Here's an aerial photo of waste facilities. F tank farm, an inter-area transfer line is 2.2 to H tank farm in this corner. H Canyon is here in the picture. The DOTF is located kind of around each building from the H tank farm. SOTF is being constructed, is adjacent to DOTF, and at the very top there, you have salt tank.
Can I ask, on the waste tanks, can you give us roughly an idea of what year each one of these iterations were?
Well, yeah, give you some rough ideas to interpolate from. So these tanks, the type 1 tanks were built 51 through 53. These tanks were built in the late 50s. The type 4 tanks were a little after that, but nominally the same time. The type 3 tanks, the last ones we put in service were constructed in the late 80s. So that's a general timeline there.
Before you move on, Elmer Simon Camp, how many of the tank 1 tanks do we have in existence?
Of the type 1 tanks, the 12 tanks, the 1 through 8 in F area, 9, 10, 11, 12 in H area. 5 to 6 is being crowded, 12 is being crowded. Thanks. Okay. So, I also heard this discussed a little bit when I walked in the previous committee meeting. But H Canyon and previously F Canyon dissolved spent reactor fuel or target assembly. They do that with nitric acid. At the time SRS was being constructed, all of the stainless steel that was available in the free world was needed for the canyons and the reactors. So the tanks themselves are constructed from carbon steel. So in order for the waste to be compatible with the carbon steel, it is neutralized by the canyon with sodium hydroxide, caustic solution. And what that does is it causes metal hydroxides and metal oxides that are in the nitric acid solution to precipitate out. So that when the tank farm receives the waste, you end up with a precipitated metals that we call sludge in the bottom of the tank and a caustic salty solution called supernate above the sludge. So in order to conserve tank space, that supernate is decanted to we had 5 total in the tank farms. 2 are operating, one of those being the 3H that was discussed a little earlier. But the supernate is sent to one of the evaporators. Excess water is boiled off, sent to the effluent treatment facility for treatment prior to release. The concentrate from the evaporator is sent to a concentrate receipt tank where it is cooled. So these are all tanks that have the cooling coils in them. As that concentrated solution cools, salt crystals will form, and that will fall to the bottom of the tank as a salt cake. Some of the concentrated supernate won't crystallize, and it can be sent back to the feed tank and passed through the evaporator a couple times. But after nominally 3 passes through the evaporator, it's not practical to evaporate any more water out of it. So it is kind of parked to the side in another tank and sits there as concentrated supernate. So our, inventory as of the end of December of 2015, 6 million gallons, less than 10% of that, 2.6 million gallons is the sludge at the bottom of the tank. The other 93% is salt waste. That's a generic term for both the supernatant and the salt cake. And those are about equal portions out of the 33 million. Interestingly, if you look at the other side, it shows where the 250 million curies reside. You'll see that the sludge, well, it's less than 10% of the volume, contains over 50% of the radioactivity. And when we talk about long-lived radionuclides, actinides, plutonium, uranium, those kind of things, they're almost exclusively within the sludge. Out of the remaining 50% of the curies, it's in the, obviously, the salt waste, but only a small portion of that, 5%, is in the salt cake itself. So salt cake is primarily inert salt crystals. Here's a picture of SLAC 11 taken at SGL. This is in the late 70s. You can see it's very thick, gelatinous kind of material. Here's a picture from inside a tank with sludge. One of the aspects for safely storing the waste is to make sure that we keep the tank head space ventilated at all times. You get radiolytic decomposition of water that's in the sludge that generates hydrogen. So when I talked on that earlier slide about our job of safely storing the waste, two of the key attributes are making sure we ventilate the head space and keep a non-corrosive environment inside the waste tank. The salt waste, you have the concentrated supernate, is thick liquid, kind of like a varnish. The precipitated sparge you've ever seen when the salt blocks or like stock or put out for beer is very hard like that. All radioactivity that's in the salt waste is within the concentrated supernate, and it's primarily cesium-137. So we talked about storing the waste. The first thing, form, 1996, we started operating EWPF, so just over 20 years ago, in March, anniversary. It started initially processing sludge waste only, and we do that by putting large mixing devices in the tank, suspending the sludge, and transferring it out to a tank, this is the tank for the EWPF. We've done that in a couple of ways. The current methodology is primarily mobile equipment stands for waste on wheels. So this is reusable tank. Here, the mixing devices, several different kinds are used. Acronym SMP is a submersible mixing pump. CSMP is a commercially available mixing pump that's not red hardened, but sufficient for use. And that kind of is the first step. So removing the solids out of the tank is the first step in getting into the closure process, and that's the bulk waste removal portion. We also then move into a mechanical heat removal, which uses, for the most part, the same mixing devices. In the first 3 or 4 operations of the pump to suspend the solids and pump them out, the vast majority of the solids come out is like 90, 95%. And then you're left with a heel at the bottom where you need to add more water. It's kind of like rinsing peanut butter out of a peanut butter jar. You can do it, you just need more water when you get to the end. Some of the tanks will deploy chemical cleaning on, particularly the sludge tanks, to get the sludge immobilized, as I mentioned, the actinides within the sludge. And so getting most of the sludge out is important. We'll do that with oxalic acid, sometimes sodium hydroxide. A few of the tanks, the original older style tanks, had leaks into the annular space. So if it had one of those leaks, we'll have to clean out the annulus, flush the coolant coils, and drop it, sample it, demonstrate what's ready to be flushed, and go to the closure process. There's just the effectiveness of chemical cleaning on the left. These are from tank 5. it's kind of hard to see on the screen here, but waste obviously in the areas of circles, and after chemical cleaning, the waste is no longer there. Similarly, you can see this, plate here for root support. That's, less than half an inch thick, and you can see most of that thickness. So chemical cleaning was very effective. The tank had leaks into the annular space. This is from tank 14. You can see there was some stress cracks at weld sites. And when the salty supernatant reaches the dryer, the annular space, it kind of forms a little like stalactite. So in this case, water would be added to dissolve those solids. For the ones that are sticking to the side of the tank, we actually have a little magnetic roller that can go around the brush and remove it. You can see on tank 5 and 6, we removed 10 gallons to show this. So now this is the inside of one of the type 4 tanks, tank 20. It does not have coolant coils, much easier to clean. But again, you can see the construction plates at the bottom are less than a half an inch thick, and most of those are exposed. So the tank was pretty clean prior to running. So this is an older, thing that we use on tank closure. So this is one for tank 12 from February. So obviously we're in April. The purpose is to show you the process we go through when we fill the tank with grout. The numbers of the sequence at which the grout is added. They're called lifts. The first lift is to put a layer in the primary, then you come back and counterbalance the annular space, fill the annular ductwork, and then move back and forth between the primary and the annular. The one that we have today shows the bulk fill with 100% complete. The line is out here, just that we're filling in this tank of ducts that are in the tank. So that's it's time consuming. You don't accomplish much of the volume, but we are on track for the individual. So I have a little video here showing the grouting of tank 12.
Sorry, for some reason, I'm here.
You're slow today, yeah.
Even from the sound.
Yeah, so we can skip that. So it kind of shows the grout being done into a hot water with a pump in the tank. And I picture some footage from inside tank 12, you can see the grout flowing in. But kind of like latex flows to the sides of the tank. We'll skip that. Okay, so we've talked about what we do with the sludge. Now we'll kind of focus on accommodating the salt part of the waste. A couple of years ago, 2008, we employed a process called VDA, where we took the lowest purity salt solution. You remember that the salt cake itself has very few radionuclides in it. We decontaminated that further by draining any interstitial liquid out of it. Dissolve some of that and process it in salt zone. The next step is what we're currently doing is operating ARP-MCU. ARP is that process. MCU is modular caustic solvent extraction. It is a demonstration of the process that will be used at SOPF. The process itself, we have a feed tank, tank 49. We transfer about 3,000 gallons at a time. That's the 1 and 2 strike tank, where monosodium titanate is added, and any actinides or strontium that are in the solution will adhere to the MSC. That allows us then to transfer that to another location, 512S is a facility. That material is passed through a filter, which then filters out the MSC, which has strontium and actinide adhered to it. and any sludge fines that may have been suspended in the salt solution. That MST and sludge is sent to DEP for processing. The clarified salt solution goes to the MCU facility, and I'll have to slide out how the contactors work. But the MCU extracts cesium, which is sent in the strip effluent stream to DEP. The decontaminated salt solution is sent to tank 50, when fed the salt segment, eventually placed in SDUs. Here's another one you'll have to click on. Comes up.
Change.
Very good. I would, give it just a second. It's gotta finish opening. That's up to you. I mean, it'll probably,
Yeah,
we can come back.
Go ahead. We'll try to go ahead. So essentially, the way that the Turbo contactor works is we feed two streams. One is the solvent, the other is the salt solution into the contactor, which is spinning very fast. Those two materials come in contact. The solvent contains an extractant, which the salt solution carrying the cesium, the extractant likes the cesium, grabs onto the cesium molecule. The spinning contactor then separates the solvent and the salt solution back out by the centrifugal force, so that now the solvent contains the cesium and the salt solution has been decontaminated. You can then reverse that process by contacting the solvent with nitric and boric acid, in which case then the acid ends up holding the cesium, and that's what we send to DEP for processing. Go forward.
Should do it too.
Yep.
Log down to this. Would you mind maybe getting them to reference their handout?
Yeah,
And then
you have a copy.
let her get a.
I can keep it. Here, Jody is mine. I've just been reading along here.
We'll share.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well, here's one here.
Oh, I'll take that
When
one.
we get it cleaned up, we'll go
We'll
back.
go back to, okay. So then if, you look, slide 34, one of the, additional salt processing technologies we're looking at, nicking tickers and tank closure cesium removal. I know, Jeff mentioned this as well. Just the overview here is that it would be cesium removal capability deployed near some of the older targeted demonstration on tank 10, which is a type 1 tank, to process the salt from that tank, extracting the cesium. The procurement spec, the unit, the tick unit, would be something that we'll procure from a subcontractor vendor. If you go to the next slide. So the extract will be designed that so the cesium can be introduced into the DEP feed stream. Our objective is to be able to take that extracted cesium and find it also at the so this is in the development process. So we're in procurement now for the city. And that should get us to where where we hope to be in December 2018, and that's at the full-scale salt waste processing facility that we'll be operating. If you noticed on the earlier diagrams, the ticker ARPMCU, we're targeting dissolved salt cake because they were lower in season concentration. SWPF will be designed to be able to process the concentrated supernatant, about 5 times the activity level of ARPMCU can process. And also, depending on the assumptions around ARPMCU performance, say 3 to 5 times faster. But the process SWPF will use is identical to ARPMCU. We'll use MST for extracting strontium, actinides, and solvent extraction to extract the seed. Top facility, you have the plant itself right there. Different disposal units. There's 1, 4, 2, 3, 5 together, and 6 that we talked about a little while ago under construction.
What is fly ash? I'm sorry, just like jump.
Yeah, so, what fly ash is, leftover, it's like ash, think of ash from a coal industry. I'm not sure exactly how it's manufactured, but it's a byproduct of an incineration process. Just another photograph there at the site. Here's SDU construction. As Jeff mentioned, how the walls are completely core to the roof and we're at the water tightness process. I'm trying to can't see the forecast, but as Jim mentioned, that's going on there. There's a forward and a check with that. And as we process so the saltstone process, we have 3 dry components: fly ash, slag, and cement that are mixed together. That then is sent to a mixer where salt solution from the tank farm is decontaminated salt solution. The current flow path is through the salt feed tank into the mixer, mixed with the dry feed into a hopper and pumped out to SDUs 3 and 5 right now, and so is SDU 6. It's targeted to come online either late in 2016 or 2017. Eventually, when SWPF comes online, since it'll have higher throughput, we'll need the benefit of some lag storage within the facility. The 2 salt solution receipt tanks will be in service then. We're in the process now of tying those in and testing them in the next month or so. That brings us to DWPF. As I mentioned, first March 1996, the largest vitrification plant in the world. DWPF receives sludge from each tank, front tank, 40 is the feed tank. It is received to the sludge receipt and adjustment tank within the shred. Is where we add the effluent streams that are coming from ARPMCU and eventually SWPF, so the MSC sludge solids and the strip effluent are added into the shred. We also add formic and nitric acid to acidify the waste, and we boil the shred, and that removes mercury from the process. Once it's chemically adjusted, it's transferred forward to the slurry mix evaporator. This is where the glass forming chemicals are added in the form of a fine powder called frit. Once the batch is assembled, it's sampled and analyzed to confirm it meets product specifications. At slurry feed tank where it's fed to the melter. I'll describe how that works on the next slide. Filled canisters are decontaminated, have a permanent plug value, and they are temporarily stored in one of the glasses stored. The melter itself has 2 sets of electrodes. There's another upper electrode, a lower electrode. The glass pool is heated by passing electrical current through the glass, and the resistivity causes the glass to heat up. The vapor space in the melter also has some heaters called dome heaters, like heating elements in your electric oven. The melter feed is fed from a feed tube down the center Our bubblers, which I will describe on the next slide, help mix the melt pool. The canister, when pouring occurs, is right under the pour spout. And the way canister pouring is initiated, a vacuum is poured on the canister, so it's like pulling a vacuum on a straw. Glass is pulled up, this riser, and it falls over into the can. When the canister is full, you break the vacuum, and the level equalizes, and you replace the canister underneath the pour spout and begin that over again. So that you're continually feeding the melter, and the pour is stopped and started by vacuum on the canister. Just a little kind of demonstration. The bubblers have argon bubbles through them. They act like conductors. They draw a glass in and cause it to circulate within the melt pool. It greatly increases the heat transfer capability within the melt pool. And when we installed those in 2010, they essentially doubled our melt rate within the melter. A DWF canister poured over 4,000 of these out of a projected around 8,200, 8,500. They're 2 feet in diameter, 10 feet tall. These are filled canisters. Obviously, you can't approach them that close. They'd be excessive dose to the individual. Why? We transport them with this large shielded canister transporter, weighs 117 tons. This picture is taken inside one of the glassway storage buildings. Each one of these little circles on the floor is a canister storage location. Each one of these is a concrete plug that provides shielding so that it is okay for individual walking. We currently have 2 buildings, Building 1 and Building 2. We're in the process now of modifying Building Number 1. They were originally designed so that each canister storage location could hold 1 canister. The initial canisters we produced have low enough heat generation and low enough radiation emission that we can actually store 2 canisters in each location. There are some modifications required for that. Here's a picture within glassway storage building 1. These are individual canister storage locations. You can see the top of the cover cans there. As I mentioned, each location needs some modification. Those storage locations have these crossbars that need to be removed. Additionally, the plug in each location needs to be modified from a concrete plug to a steel plug, which offers the same radiation shielding, but it's thinner and more commonly used. So where are we today? The original 1 tank contained waste around to 40. We showed this on the gallons here. Right now, we have all of the elements of our flow sheet in operation. DWF has been processing flow for 20 years. We are processing salt waste through ARPMCU. That salt processing will increase significantly when SWPF comes online. We're hoping to use the ticker process to target salt from specific old style tanks to accelerate closure of those tanks. In the process, less than 1% of the radiutilized remain in the tanks, can't be removed in the cleaning process, and they're routed in place. Well below 1% of the radiutilized lead and saltstone. Right now, we're at around, I think we process 18 million gallons of ground, and that contains about 1,000 curies. The decontamination factors for ARP and SWPF have really improved with better solvent deployment. Ultimately, we expect that saltstone will have around 600,000 curies below the commitment of 800,000. And so very few radiutilized in those 2 locations. Nucleus put in the canisters, will be eventually disposed of that. Question? Yes, ma'am.
Susan Corbett, yeah, thank you, that was fascinating. I feel like I was sitting in my high school chemistry class, and it's pretty intense stuff. So this is a picture of a tank that's been cleaned, chemically cleaned.
Right.
Now, are all the cooling pipes gonna stay in there? Because they're all very irradiated and they're very hot.
That's right, they are flushed and filled with grout themselves.
So then this has not been grounded though?
No,
You
that
will
has not
pour
been grounded.
concrete.
That's right, so the tank will be filled, so obviously on the outside, it'll be encapsulated with grout. Will pump grout into the inside, so
Okay.
they'll be internally filled with grout by the bulk grout.
The internals are gonna stay in there. Excuse me, I made notes, so it's been long here. Here. So you said this is about 1% of the waste in the bottom.
Some tanks that have,
Yeah, there's,
non-radioactive solids that will say, but by radioactivity, which is the measurement we care about, less than 1% stay within the heels of the tank.
in the heels of the tank. So over here, is this where the mercury extra process here, you pull the mercury, this is where you pull the mercury out?
Yes,
I've known that before. How much plutonium can you actually get in a canister?
I'm sorry, the
How much
question?
plutonium can you actually get in? Is it how many kilograms? Or?
It's 897 grams per cubic meter, and a canister is like 3/4 of a cubic meter, so you can do the
I have to do math?
Yeah.
Roughly, give me a ballpark.
So half a kilogram. That's the max. That's the max itself contains, the 897 fissile loading, so the uranium-235 counts towards that, uranium-233, there is 239 in the waste. So when we accommodate incremental plutonium, it's to keep the batch average below the 890, obviously keeps the margin below. So half a kilogram.
Yeah. Okay, and the building one is where you're gonna double stack.
Correct.
I had a question about that. So are these canisters that are double stacked, these are ready to go to the permanent repository, or they would have to be repackaged?
All of our canisters are ready to go to the permanent repository. They would need to be put in a shipping container in a shipping facility, which is not constructed, but the canisters themselves do not need to be repackaged.
Okay. I think that's it. Thank you.
Sir.
Earl Shepherd, Cab. I have 3 questions. How long does it take for each of the canisters after they've been filled to cool down? Or is there a cool down period before you move it? Because, you know,
Yeah, so there's not necessarily a cool down period. In fact, as soon as it comes out from underneath the melter pour spout, while it is still hot, we insert a temporary plug, and then as the canister cools pretty quickly, it'll shrink fit the temporary plug. And then just by the nature of our process, where that canister is then moved to a decel, where the decontamination is done by a wet sandblasting, that in itself will cool the canister, and then it's smeared, tested to make sure that doesn't have any transferable contamination. The permanent plug is welded, and then it's transferred on required cool down period.
and I
Accommodate the canister that's generating 834 watts. The canisters we produce come below that. Some of the initial ones were in the 10, which is what is allowing it. In fact, our projection on those canisters we produce will be in the 200 to 300 watt range. So even our hottest canisters we're forecasting could be double stacked.
And my last question, the transporter, 3-4 years ago when I first went out, they were talking about, it's old, needs to be replaced. It's the only one that it work to.
We have a program where we analyze the systems on the shielded canister transporter. The most difficult one to replace or accommodate is the control logic. But, you know, it's really just diesel engines, hydraulic pumps, electronic chain hoist. So it's easily maintainable. It is we have backup plans for lines that we look at, but in each of those cases, it's always beneficial to keep the one we have running. It's kind of like the car. You know,
it's not like a Ford Ranger.
Yeah, no matter how old your Ford Ranger is, it's much cheaper to fix it. We have a plan that if some kind of catastrophic failure were to occur, we have backup.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have one confusion I want to straighten out. Comparing
If you're sending in, say, 12 curies per gallon, you get 1 curie per gallon out. So that's just the design criteria. Our initial operations of that were in the 200 to 400 range. We had some runs that were even higher, so an order of magnitude better than designed. Can't remember what year, in the last couple of years, we modified the extractant so that it's much more efficient, and we're getting extraction efficiencies that are in the 40,000 to 60,000 range, which is what SWPF was originally designed for. So improvements to ARP-MCU have gotten it to the SWPF design criteria. Now that said, the same improvements that we've implemented at ARP or MCU, those translate to some extent to SWPF, and its extraction efficiency for season will be even higher. And I can't speak to how high that would be. But, they're comparable, but SWPF will be better.
interesting. And then the last question, talking about equipment breaking and leaks and so forth. The melter, how old is that thing? And it still hadn't broken, or?
No, it has not. Yeah, it was originally planned when I started. Yeah, I was in DWPF when we started up, and the vision was that the melters would have to be replaced every 2 years. And this one was installed in 2003. So it just gives you an idea of, and experts can't explain it. There are similar melters in service in France, for example, and they are getting the 2-year life. You know, it's kind of, we're not looking at gift horses them out. But we have melter 3 is available and ready to be installed. We're working on melter 4. So we have plans to replace it. The first melter lasted 8 years. This one obviously is 12 to 13. But it's going strong. Yes, ma'am.
So I was doing some math, because I hate it. So, just because I'm curious. So we get a half a kilogram of plutonium in each canister, right? And there's roughly, because I Googled it, 907 kilograms in a ton.
Okay.
So that means in a ton of plutonium, we need 453 canisters. Half of 907. So then how many tons of plutonium do we have out there?
Well, we're not sending any more plutonium.
I'm sorry?
We're not sending any more plutonium.
I'm just saying, how many canisters are we gonna need to accommodate all the plutonium?
Well, they have all the plutonium, I mean, you're estimating 7,000 to 8,000 canisters.
Yeah, another 4,000, 4,500 canisters.
So we're not sending any more plutonium to
liquid waste for disposition. So everything that they have, we're not sending any more over there. Now, I say that with the, again, half of our with DOE, as we process spent fuel, there's gonna be some residual amount of plutonium in the waste we send over there. So but the large plutonium that's stored in K area, that may go to LOX, may not go, it's not going to the liquid waste system. Obviously, that would overwhelm the quantities and what they can do, and that's not a disposition path. So the math you're doing, I don't know if that's what you're projecting, try to send the plutonium we have in K area, all the plutonium, it's not going to the liquid waste system.
All right.
Did the old can and canister concept, was that not done because there was gonna be too much plutonium in the cans or in the canisters? Or
That was Dawn's talking about, we were going to vitrify some of the plutonium into smaller canisters, load those canisters into a Christmas tree arrangement into a DWPF canister, and then fill the DWPF canister with glass, just as they're doing now. That was abandoned when LOX came on board. Okay, so why throw away plutonium that has inherent energy value? Whether you agree with that decision or not, that's the reason that was kind of put on the back burner. Depending upon where MOX goes forward or not, it may
come back in again?
relive itself into a disposition option. They're looking at the kind of the downblend and dilute and dispose method going to WIP is one of the options they're looking at. But that was a viable alternative before. It may come up again.
Okay, so it won't go to the tank farm. It wouldn't go to the tank farm, right, but it would go through DWPF.
You build a separate small vitrification facility to fill these smaller canisters, containers with vitrified plutonium, very similar to, but that whole process would have to be developed and, obviously cost, time, money, schedule, risk. Decisions,
Changes.
everything else. And that's why, the dilute and dispose for plutonium, has already been a proven technology and such. But again, way outside the scope of the liquid waste program.
We have some questions from online.
Okay.
Going back to the tanks, how much sludge is left in the bottom of the tanks?
On the slide, 226 million gallons.
Okay. And how many more DWPF canisters are to be filled with sludge?
Yeah, so, depending on different scenarios we look at, the answer is 4,200 to 4,500 canisters.
And will sludge processing totally end before SWPF is operational?
No, so, with SWPF startup in December of 2018, we adjust the sludge distribution in the canisters so that they finish at the same time. And that's what the bulk of the sludge is. We talked about earlier, after the bulk of the sludge comes out easily, each one of these tanks is like an old peanut butter jar with traces of peanut butter. So that heel removal process takes several years after both the bulk of the sludge has gone in, SWPF has completed processing all the salt. Is that it? Any other questions?
Just, what are the sizes of the tanks, the small ones versus the SDU6?
Okay, SDU6 is 30 million gallons, and our tanks are, the waste tanks are 1 million gallons. On the SDUs, they were about 3 million gallons. So those small tanks were 3 million for grout. Waste tanks are nominally 1 million. The biggest are 1 million, 1.3. The type 1 are the smallest at 750,000.
And how many of the large SDUs are planned?
Again, it depends on several factors. It'll either be SDU 13, so it'll be 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So either 8 or 9 of those.
So don't expect any income tax refunds.
No, obviously there's a lot of surplus salt made to clean the tanks, correct? I mean, because we have 36 million gallon cubic.
Yeah, Well, that's a good point.
So it exponentially grows as you process it.
You're exactly right. So it actually turned the 33 million gallons of salt waste. The salt cake itself, it takes 3 gallons of water to dissolve 1 gallon of salt cake. And then to adjust that for the correct sodium molarity to be processed, it takes another gallon. And then the concentrated supernatant again needs to be diluted down so it can be processed. So that 33 million gallons of salt waste ends up being about 110 million gallons of salt that need to be processed through SOPF. For 100 million through SOPF, 110 total. So yes, it expands significantly.
But the evaporators are very important in that whole equation as well.
They are, once we got ARP-MCU operating, the importance of the evaporators decreased somewhat. Once SOPF comes online, the evaporation for things like washing the tanks, washing the sludge batches, receiving new waste will be non-existent. There still is a recycle stream from DWPF that we can use to dissolve salt, but logistically it would be beneficial to maintain one of the evaporators to it.
So you said 1% of the waste will be left behind. Is that 1% of the 250 million curies?
That's correct.
So is that
Less than that,
is it
yes.
kind of spread out in different amounts in different tanks depending on what was left in there?
Yes, yeah, go back to the peanut butter out, so you have 51 tanks that had jars of peanut butter and you scrape it out the best you can, you're gonna have a little bit in each one of those.
About 2.5 million curies left behind. What would you say the prime suspect is there in there? The main contaminant?
It depends on the tanks. It's generally an actinide, uranium. One of the uraniums are plutonium. One of the tanks, I think it was 18, had some neptunium in it, but it's the longer lived valuable as they're harder to remove. Yes, sir.
Some of the plutonium was directly vitrified via the preparation tank in DWPS. How much plutonium in kilograms is vitrified in the DWPS?
I do not know. It was sent on the slide. Yeah, take too hard. On slide. If you look at slide 42, the direct discards from the canyon. What that means is that, similar with the SRE that was discussed at the nuclear materials meeting, instead of sending it to the tank I depicted early on where the solids settle out and you can't lift it off, that's a normal receipt. Plutonium in the SRE is sent to a tank in each tank farm that is then fed directly to DWPF, so that plutonium could be better proportioned amongst the canisters. But I don't recall how much we've done with that.
Okay. Well, thank you, Pete. Great presentation. We had our committee discussion. Do we have anything from around the table that needs to be discussed? Mr. Davis.
Just that, the whole issue of this evaporator going down kind of emerged after you set your work plan for the year. And I think I, for one, would like to hear more about the evolution of that workaround once they figure it out, what they're going to do about the loss of that.
We can add that as a presentation.
Thank you.
I give us, a little bit of, like
Oh, I
I said, we're just
understand you
doing
need
the
some
review
time.
now to identify the cause, so give us a couple months maybe.
Yeah.
Thank you.
July?
Yeah, July would be your next subcommittee.
No, July will be the next, June is next subcommittee, July is next full board.
Why don't we give you a status in June?
Yes, Nancy.
How about the motion?
That was still under investigation. Still.
Although he's causing a bunch of extras on that.
Well, they've identified one task force, I think, Pete showed you there, a little mercury removal step on DWPF. So we've identified one process there where it's an old process that had been deactivated. We're gonna resume that, over some period of time. I don't have a schedule yet for exactly when that'll be implemented, but we're pursuing that path. The other is, of course, we draw some of the mercury out during normal evaporator operations. So that's another process where we withdraw some of that. And then, you know, still looking to see where else we can take advantage of it. Now, the other part of it is, you know, there's two steps. One is you can take mercury out and process. The other is where you can find a way to live with the mercury, okay? And so there's a series of steps from, and we've kind of caught just normal employee safety, better monitoring whenever you do any work. For instance, we had a job a little while ago, had a mercury sniffer. Mercury in this area, so we backed off, and you know, to recall at the start of it, he's about, well, how does this affect flammability, for instance, that we have to worry about. So we took a step back, took some conservative measures, and now we've gone through some additional safety-based work and identified the appropriate boundaries, you know, safety kind of conditions to go address it. So we're tackling it on a number of fronts. It's one of those things probably, you know, if you want an update briefing, I think Rich Edwards was here from SRR not too long ago, kind of scoped it out for you. But it might be something on maybe a 6-month basis would probably be about the appropriate time to say, here are, you know, that collection of activities we've taken on.
Anybody else want to say more on that?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the other question is, do we have any thoughts on recommendations, any issues we want to tackle on it? I just don't see any until we find out more about the evaporator. I'm not hearing any issues.
Not at this point,
What?
but we'll be working.
In addition to the mercury and the evaporator issues, there was also concern of foaming that had come up.
Right.
And what?
Foaming.
I think that's in a recommendation that I'm working on. The foaming, and so it took me a while to realize it was a typo and not something else.
I'm also on the nuclear materials committee, and I had found it quite beneficial, being new to the cab at the time, for having a site visit and a tour of the specific areas in question. Is there anything on the docket for
28th.
June 28th is liquid waste tour.
June 28th?
No,
No, no,
April.
in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Oh, they just came out this week?
Well, the date's been on the
Yeah, it's been on
calendar,
for a while.
but, I just sent out the invitation for it today, this morning.
Could you remind us when that next
I
tour is?
believe it's September 14th, as I 14th to 15th.
Elementary.
Liquid waste is April 28th.
Just for information, what we've done earlier in the year, we addressed, at the executive meeting that when the schedule is posted for the CAB, the site tours date should be posted also. So it started this year, so moving forward, we should get it early in advance so you can plan for it.
Is there something with the retired person?
I'm going home in January.
Anybody else? Mike? All right, public comment? I see or hear none. Okay.
Nothing.
Thank you.
Thanks, Earl.